As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and it has been a few weeks now since Governor Ron DeSantis entered the ring and announced his presidential candidacy. So the polls really haven't shifted as much as a lot of DeSantis supporters were anticipating. So what's going on? What advice should be given to Governor DeSantis, and what is really the truth of the polls and potentially the situation between Trump and DeSantis? Who is actually winning? What do we expect from here? All of these questions and more will be answered between myself and my good friend Josh Hammer, who is the editor-in-chief of Newsweek and also has a really fantastic show called The Josh Hammer Show on Newsweek. And so he'll join us coming up right after this. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you. So joining me now, my good friend Josh Hammer, who is the senior editor at large for Newsweek and also hosts a very important podcast that I love. You have to listen to, subscribe to. It's called The Josh Hammer Show at Newsweek. And I was a guest just a couple weeks ago. And I think we're going to kind of do a Saki circle back on that one, Josh, today and kind of do a follow-up. So welcome.
Jenna, last time when I interviewed you, we got a lot of attention. So let's see if we can replicate that.
Yeah, it was a great show, actually. And you and I discussed it was actually the day after Ron DeSantis declared that he was formally running for president, had the Twitter space, and we were talking about that. So I wanted to bring you on today and we'll do kind of a follow-up. It's been about 3 weeks or so. So what's your impression of particularly first how his campaign is doing in the 3 weeks that he's announced, which, really in the grand scheme of things isn't long in terms of this whole primary that I'm already ready to have this over.
Yeah, talk about the longest 3 weeks of my entire life, right? Especially that first week or two. Just the level of fever pitch, the vitriol, the mudslinging, just ugly stuff. And you're the last person in the world that I need to tell that to. Obviously, you've been kind of, unfortunately, kind of the front and center of many of the attacks from the Mar-a-Lago crew in this particular case. But look, as far as my assessment of how the primary is going, it continues to be a two-horse race. It's Trump, DeSantis, and everyone else. There is really no path forward that exists at the moment for Nikki Haley or Tim Scott, Mike Pence, Vivek Ramaswamy, Francis Suarez. It's hard to see any of these guys breaking through. I genuinely just cannot foresee what could possibly happen. So it remains a two-horse race for sure. What's interesting to me, Jenna, is that the polling that I've seen in the aftermath of the federal indictment of Trump, we didn't see the bounce that we saw in the polling after the Alvin Bragg prosecution in New York. So that's not to say that Trump's approvals have been cratering. That's definitely not the case, but they've they've roughly stabilized. And if you take that as a roughly 45 to 50% in kind of the Real Clear Politics average of the polls right now, a certain percentage of that is kind of the locked in MAGA diehard, but a certain percentage is also those who prefer Trump now, but they're waiting for someone else to make their case. And that obviously kind of leads us to Ron DeSantis. So from DeSantis's perspective, I think the path is clearly there. He just has to kind of do a more maybe kind of all-encompassing, a very kind of aggressive making of the case for people who remain kind of soft Trump supporters, but are considering leaving kind of the bandwagon, but they haven't heard that full throttle case yet. Now, for folks like you and I who kind of love the culture war, DeSantis he's the guy. I mean, he has a monopoly on kind of the anti-woke issues. That has been his gubernatorial track record. He owns those issues. But I think in terms of kind of trying to peel away that soft Trump support, I think focusing on education would be a very good idea. I mean, no one has kind of been a trailblazer on the education issue like DeSantis has in Florida. That's another issue that he has owned that I would like to see perhaps a little more talked about on the national campaign trail. And then just talk about the economy, frankly. I mean, the economy under Biden is obviously not in a particularly good state, but Florida has one of the lowest unemployment rates of any state in the country. His economic track record here in the Sunshine State is very, very good. So, I think the path for him is there. Maybe the movement in the polls hasn't been quite as robust as I think some of us might have wanted to see in the first 3 weeks. But again, it's very, very, very early, like you said.
Yeah, and I think that's really the issue to focus on here with all of these people who are still ardent Trump supporters. They're pointing to the polls and saying, Trump has a 30-40% lead, depending on whether you ask his pollster or Hillary's. They're kind of saying the same thing, which we should be asking the question of why on that one. But I think you're right to say that these polls aren't measuring intensity. And that's really the factor I think that is going to be the most important, because I agree with you that it is a two-person race. And I do think that Ron DeSantis has a huge opportunity to make those conversions from people who have been Trump supporters for the last, 8 years, or maybe even less than that. Maybe they saw some of President Trump's achievements and some of these things of, the weaponized government going after him, all of those things, totally legitimate positions, and they became Trump supporters, but they were conservatives prior to him coming down the escalator in 2015. Right. And so for a lot of these people that are just the hardcore MAGAs, they are either former Democrats or former non-politicals that really don't see the GOP as being anything other than Trump. So, of course, they're not going to change their position because Trump brought them in, and they've even said that openly. But for the larger percentage of the party, for the people like you and me that have voted in every single election that we could, and, I was one of the debate nerds in high school that literally wanted to celebrate my 18th birthday more than my 21st birthday because it wasn't about the alcohol, it was about voting to me. And so for those type of conservatives that really understand this, we were kind of born and bred, as conservative Republicans, the intensity is not going to be there. And so for those people who want to see Ron DeSantis be the leader, and they want to then make that conversion and say, okay, he has a legitimate opportunity here to really pull ahead, and they're not seeing that in the polls. I think what I would advise, and I want to know your opinion on this, is that DeSantis does have to be not only more broad, as you've described, in terms of tackling the issues and showing his record, but I would love him to see to mount more of an aggressive PR campaign, because what I see the Trump campaign doing quite effectively, and I was part of this apparatus for the 4 years that Trump was in office. His comm shop is like none other. They are building a caricature of Ron DeSantis as kind of this, boring, stereotypical rhino of the 2016 mold. And that's a straw man that they're knocking down with really no fight or pushback from the candidate himself. So in terms of PR, what would you like to see?
Yeah, so if you look at Ron DeSantis' media strategy as governor, he tended to kind of eschew national media. He tended to kind of eschew corporate media. He stuck largely to conservative, right-leaning media. He kind of gave exclusive interviews to folks like Charlie Kirk. He kind of gave a lot of interviews to the Florida Standard, which is run by Will Witt. That's the right of center publication here in Florida, to Florida's Voice, run by Brendan Leslie, kind of outlets like that. But what I would like to see more from DeSantis is to actually kind of take the gloves off and get in a little more of a kind of a fisticuffs kind of open brawling strategy with the national media. I think kind of engaging the liberals on CBS, NBC, ABC, all that. It's a good idea. I mean, Governor DeSantis thrives in that element. I mean, anyone who has watched his press conferences, I mean, those press conferences are when he can't necessarily avoid kind of the left-leaning media, so he's forced to confront some of them. And he's had any number of kind of viral press conference moments over the course of his gubernatorial tenure here in Florida, where he is just swatting down. I mean, he's very good. He's very quick. He's agile. Right when the moment hits him, he knows how to kind of like shoot the journalist down, which is a tactic that maybe he probably learned from kind of studying how Trump and some of Trump's comms people did that in the White House. But he also kind of has that natural kind of irritability to an extent as well. And I say that it's actually a good thing in this case. I think that people are actually looking for someone who is a little irritable, who is just fed up with the nonsense and who is ready to fight back against a media apparatus that is so heavily in the tank for the ruling class, the Democratic Party, against the interests of conservatives and Republicans. So DeSantis should just, I think, embrace that. I mean, if I were kind of advising him, I would say kind of, the right of center media is great. I mean, you've interviewed him, I've interviewed him. All that's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but maybe kind of a more concerted effort to kind of just go the mainstream route as well, because that helps on multiple fronts. One is it helps him to kind of just get exposed to voters out there in a way who wouldn't necessarily otherwise hear him. And two, most important, is he's just very good in that setting, like I said. So there's no reason necessarily to avoid it. So he famously has avoided, I think, the corporate media on the left-leaning media, but I think kind of changing that would be a good idea as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Josh Hammer, that it can take what the base really loved about Trump in 2016 and in 2020 and even currently, but then separate himself and provide contrast to the things that they don't like some of the things that they feel are too brash or vulgar about Trump, that people like you and I, even in supporting him in 2016 and beyond, and and I even worked for him, there were certain things that we would never condone, like, for example, the Access Hollywood tape or some of these other things that we would say, well, we are for the man and what he's doing now, but we're not going to just gloss over some of these things, but we're certainly not going to ever condone them. But it seems like now the Trump camp, and you mentioned the vulgar attacks against people like me, Kayleigh McEnany, Aaron Perini, Katrina Pearson. I mean, especially particularly women, but I think across the board, just some of this vulgarity that the base has embraced, that in 2016, we would have all said, okay, we like him and his policies, but we don't condone that behavior. Now that's kind of become this model for MAGA in a way that I think is really dangerous to our overall moral and upright society. But if DeSantis can take the brash way of pushing back against the fake news and can go into, these dens of propaganda like CNN and MSNBC, and then still be that wholesome contrast and say, look, I've been married to the same woman for X number of years. I have this great family. I'm pushing back against woke. I mean, and drawing that contrast, I think that would make the conversions a lot more than being so reticent to enter some of those engagements and only going on a lot of conservative media. Like tonight, he's on Fox News with Kayleigh McEnany, and how many people are really going to watch that or think that's going to make a difference? So what do you think about him going toe to toe with somebody like Gavin Newsom, a fellow governor, but not yet really pulling the gloves off for Donald Trump? What's kind of behind the strategy there? And do you agree with it, or do you think he should change it?
So, it's tough, right? I mean, it is an unenviable, predicament to be in a situation where you are trying to take on a former president head on. It's just a very kind of difficult thing to do. A month ago, 2 months ago, probably, I was still thinking that when it got to that inevitable kind of first primary debate, and by the way, who knows if Trump will even be there on the debate stage at this point? I mean, the trial is scheduled to start 9 days before the first debate. It's probably going to get delayed. Pre-trial motions, you and I as lawyers know how that goes. But, assuming that they are on the debate stage, my first instinct from a couple months ago was to basically just not get in the mud, because, if two guys get into the mud, the pig who loves wrestling in the mud is necessarily going to win, and that's Trump. But at some point, I think you're right. I mean, you don't really have a choice. You kind of do have to push back when you're being strawmanned and mischaracterized so much there. And part of that could come on a national media stage, but I think part of it could come directly kind of mano a mano on a debate stage at the right opportunity. But I think DeSantis's best play against Trump on an actual debate stage, if that does manifest, and I kind of hope that it does, is basically not necessarily. I mean, he'll have to take some counter punches on the merits. I mean, at this point, I think that's unavoidable. But I think the best strategy is just to continue to portray himself as the logical successor to this movement. Trump is being obviously persecuted. I mean, a lot of it is definitely self-inflicted wounds, but some of it is undoubtedly political persecution. And at the end of the day, Trump did serve his purpose. I mean, he was a paradigm shift in the Republican Party, the whole America First thing, a more nationalist populist agenda when it comes to rethinking bromides on trade, immigration, foreign policy. I'm totally on board with all of that. But there's a huge generational gap between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. We have a baby boomer who, from my perspective, kind of exhibits many of the flaws of the baby boomer generation. I'm talking here mostly about selfishness, kind of this me attitude. And DeSantis, who, like you said, has this telegenic young family, attractive wife, 3 kids under the age of 6. He needs to position himself as the logical successor to that movement. And, I think complementing that dynamic on a stage with Trump by doing these debates with Gavin Newsom, if that also transpires, is a very, very good idea. I mean, I, for one, would love to see that debate between Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis. One is because these are 2 of the largest states in the country. I mean, California is the largest, Florida is the 3rd largest. And there was a very, very clear and obvious blue state versus red state dichotomy that the voters will be able to see with their own eyes. And I think that DeSantis, I'm a little biased, but I think that he objectively wins that debate. And he wins that debate based on all the data that I've seen. I mean, they ran out of U-Hauls in California last year for people trying to flee the state. They literally ran out of U-Hauls. I mean, California's population declined in the most recent census ending in 2020 for the first time since California was admitted to the union as a state in the middle of the 19th century. Florida is gaining residents. They surpassed New York as the 3rd largest state. And they're all Republicans trickling in, by the way. They're all Republicans. Republicans outnumber Democrats in Florida by 500,000 voters, approximately speaking. So I would love to see that. I think that's a good dynamic, is to try to position yourself as a successor while taking counter punches while necessary to Trump, while really kind of taking the gloves off on a national stage when you have this red state Florida model versus this blue state California model, which I would just absolutely love to see play out on national television.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, of being and positioning himself as the natural successor, because originally in this model, when President Trump was looking like he was headed to victory in 2020 and anticipated being in office for another 4 years, when we get to 2024, there was inevitably going to have to be a natural successor. And so to say, listen, you didn't get your other 4 years, but the time has come to pass the baton, and all of those different things. And saying, let's now look at Florida and what DeSantis has been able to do on the state level, translate that to the federal level. And I think no question, you can say that he would, if he's able to accomplish what he did in Florida on a national level, that would be even more significant and just numerically more wins than President Trump was able to accomplish. And that's not saying that we don't appreciate everything that he did accomplish, and that he wasn't one of the greatest presidents, if not the greatest president of my lifetime. And we can acknowledge all of those things while saying that we can continue to move forward as a nation and as a country. And I think that is the key that the Trump campaign does not want people to be able to unlock and use to unlock kind of this pathway into the future. They want to make it, if you support anyone other than Trump, then you are anti-Trump. You've never served Trump. I mean, people have told me, well, because you're even possibly being neutral in this issue, or you're leaning DeSantis, you're supporting him or whatever, then because of that, you clearly never supported Trump to begin with. You've been an anti-Trumper, and you're, now this deep state embedded, total breakdown of everything that he's ever had. And which, to that, I would say, wow, should I use my power continuing for evil or for good now? Because apparently, I alone ran the entire administration, even though I never worked for it, but whatever. So, but that's what they're setting up as another straw man, to say that if you have that perspective and kind of this bigger picture perspective, then that means that you can't also be a supporter of Trump and recognize his accomplishments. And I think that is totally a false premise. And so I think DeSantis would do well to lean into that. And interestingly, though, with that debate, you and I are convinced totally by data, and we like these debates. We're, the brainiacs in terms of being lawyers, all of this stuff. But a lot of this also is emotional and television and popular appeal. And I don't see DeSantis having tapped into that nearly as much as he needs to gain some of those conversions. And maybe a debate with Gavin Newsom and kind of taking the gloves off would be the catalyst for something like that. But one of my concerns about that would be, the number one rule of debate is you don't enter the ring with someone who isn't up to your level. And so being a current presidential candidate, do you think that if he engaged Newsom before Newsom announces president, which my theory is that he probably will, but while he's still a governor, do you think that is then closing DeSantis into this kind of I'm just a governor, not a presidential candidate? Or do you think that the benefits outweigh that possible perception?
It's a very interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that, to be honest with you, but I do think the benefits probably do outweigh the perceived costs here. I hear you. I mean, I understand where you're coming from with the possible downsides there, but California remains the largest state in the country, right? And California has produced no shortage of high-profile Democratic politicians, from Nancy Pelosi to Kamala Harris, obviously, and any number of other examples. And Gavin Newsom is very, very clearly running a shadow campaign to be president of the United States. The only question is whether he runs in 2024 or 2028. But, you don't put out these statements, calling Ron DeSantis a weak man, or, going on Sean Hannity. I mean, for Gavin Newsom, that's hostile media. I mean, you don't do these things unless you are trying extremely aggressively to portray yourself as the successor to Joe Biden. So I do think the benefits outweigh the costs here, because California is the largest state in the country. It is such a breeding ground for kind of Democratic Party royalty. Gavin Newsom is very clearly ambitious to be the president of the United States, whether it's in 2024 or 2028. And again, it does give the voters just this very clear kind of stark red state versus blue state model. And, ultimately, I think of the 2024 general election between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party becomes a referendum of sorts on Florida model of red state governance versus the California model of blue state governance. Again, I have to like Republicans' odds, just based, again, on just the overwhelming data that shows that the American people are quite literally moving to states like Florida and quite literally moving out of states like California. And then the final thing, just kind of reiterate what you and I both already said, is that getting DeSantis in an environment like that, I think would be very good, because he would very ably be able to punch back against Gavin Newsom. And Gavin Newsom has a bit of an attitude, right? So DeSantis would kind of have to kind of just, brush off his shoulders and kind of just relax a little bit more, kind of get in there, not so much teleprompter stuff, just do his thing. And he's very good at just doing his thing, at being himself. And I think that debate format would kind of naturally let him do exactly that. So I do think the benefits outweigh the cost there, but you're not wrong to flag that there's some possible downside.
Yeah, and I think that your response to that makes sense. And if it is framed as, listen, Gavin Newsom is obviously perceiving himself and is probably perceived by his own party as the successor of Joe Biden, whether that is in 2024 or 2028. So if we're looking at him as a likely future presidential candidate and framing it that way, then DeSantis could say, hey, let's take the blue state and the red state, and we'll contrast that and see who could better take the data that is being shown in their states and translate that to the federal level. And that type of contrast, I think, would be incredible. So I think that that's a great response in terms of Gavin Newsom. So going back to the Republican debate, though, and Donald Trump actually entering into the ring right now, unless something else changes, and of course it could in the next 6 or 7 weeks before the first debate in Milwaukee, my prediction right now is that Donald Trump does not debate. And the reason that I think that, for a couple of reasons. First, we just heard the announcement yesterday that Bret Baier and Martha MacCallum are going to be moderating. So this is a Fox News debate, which typically he would have felt is very friendly territory, but we just saw the absolutely brutal interview with Bret Baier. And I don't see this being really any different in terms of the moderators. They're clearly not going to favor Trump, but also he would be going in to this type of territory that, as Bret Baier pointed out, is basically everybody that either he has endorsed previously, like DeSantis, or who actually worked for him in his own administration are now running against him. And so it's going to be perceived as kind of this, 8-on-1. And then you also have the Chris Christie factor, who is running for president literally just to troll Donald Trump. I don't think that the negatives of people saying, hey, he refused to engage, in his mind is going to outweigh the negatives of going in and having those clips that are run over and over, unless he thinks that he can give as good as he gets. And of course, his ego may say, yeah, I want to go do that. But he's already said as well that he doesn't do multi-candidate events. And that was his reason for not going and participating in the roast and ride in Iowa with Joni Ernst that the other presidential candidates showed up to. So I think that he is going to right now kind of say, hey, listen, I want to be perceived as the incumbent. So you guys can go do your little debate, and he'll post something on Truth Social, not engage. That's my prediction right now. But what do you think?
So I agree with that. And I think you left off even two more factors as to why he probably won't debate. The first is that the RNC, of course, will make everyone on that debate stage sign a loyalty pledge to support the eventual nominee, something that Trump has, shall we say, been a little reluctant to do in the past. And I have my reservations as to whether he would even abide by that in a hypothetical where he loses the nomination. But that's kind of a story for another day. So I think that definitely militates in favor of him skipping out on the first debate as well. And another reason why I think he probably does skip the first debate is because obviously Trump totally ignored his lawyers in doing the Bret Baier interview. I mean, Jenny, you and I are both lawyers. I mean, talk about like a nightmare client. I mean, he was your client, obviously. I don't want to put you on the spot there, but I mean, if I were one of his lawyers right now and I was watching that interview with Bret Baier, my jaw would drop to the ground at what I heard my legal client say while under federal indictment. So he obviously ignored them there. But I have to think that his lawyers, will probably try to dissuade him from being in additional settings where he might just kind of run his mouth about an ongoing federal investigation. So to the extent that he listens to them at all, which is a somewhat dubious proposition, of course, I think that probably also militates in favor of him skipping out on the first debate. Now, on the other hand, like you said, if there's one thing that Donald Trump in his entire life has never turned down, it is, free, unearned media, right? So that does strongly militate in the other direction. But at the end of the day, I think Trump's basic calculation that he has said that he has more to lose by entering this debate than to win is right. I mean, he obviously is the polling front runner right now. He could put himself in additional legal jeopardy. He could, take a punch across the jaw by Chris Christie or perhaps someone else. So he definitely does, I think, stand more to lose, not even withstanding the loyalty pledge situation. So I think he probably does not debate, but I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, I'm not confident in that prediction. I wouldn't be shocked if he does debate because the guy, again, he's never seen a TV camera that he doesn't like.
Yeah, really true. And all I will comment on his lawyer's advice, and probably going against that, is that as Jay Sekulow and I have said to each other, who of course, as you know, was one of his other former personal lawyers like I was, Jay and I love to say to each other, we were his lawyers, not his conscience. And so I'll leave it at that. But then, moving forward, though, into the whole primary season, I am already ready for all of this to be over because, I hate the mudslinging back and forth, just kind of vile stuff from the campaign that seems even just increasingly so in this particular primary than it has in other primaries. And maybe that's just the medium of Twitter. Maybe that's just because of some of the personality elements of Donald Trump that his supporters are taking on. But for whatever reason, this is just very, very hostile, and I don't think is overall good for conservatism. But we do have a really long way to go. And so in terms of just the scale of this, do you think that this is going to play better or worse for Trump versus DeSantis in terms of how long we have to go? And in terms of what the primary map actually looks like, because right now, it doesn't really matter what certain voters in certain states think. It's ultimately going to matter this kind of scaffolded primary season.
So I actually think this definitely does cut in favor of Ron DeSantis for multiple reasons. One is, as you've gently suggested, and I would wholly agree with, the current kind of Trump MAGA strategy is in many ways just to spew all sorts of vitriol and mudslinging, presents half truths, straw man the opponents, but that only works so much. I mean, the American people at the end of the day, outside of the people, the 25% roughly of Republican voters who are MAGA till they die, the voters, like you said, who pre-2016 were probably Democrats, or they were actually, in all likelihood, probably just not political at all. Those voters are not going to budge. But a lot of voters ultimately are just going to get sick of that level of just intense negativity, of mudslinging. At the end of the day, the United States is not in a great place right now. Inflation, the economy on the foreign stage, there's so much going on right now that voters really care about. They want to know what you're going to do to bring down inflation. They want to know what you're going to do to bring down the price of chicken, eggs, milk, and whatnot in the supermarket aisle. On the shelves. These are the issues that people care about, not this ridiculous negativity, this mudslinging, this kind of personal beefing with each other. So I think that the more this drags on, the more kind of the median Republican primary voter who's on the margins probably kind of just looks at that and goes, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Why are you not talking about the issues that matter? And that kind of plays to one of my broader criticisms of the posture that Trump's 2024 campaign has taken, is that he's really not that focused on the actual substantive issues that matter. He's really not. He talks a lot about yesterday's issues. He talks a lot about the 2020 election. He talks a lot about January 6th, things like that. But he's really not laser focused on the current substantive issues that matter. On the other hand, he is much more interested in kind of settling old scores and personal grievances and whatnot. And then when you take all that and you throw on top of it the fact that he is already under criminal prosecution in multiple jurisdictions. There are potentially 2 more to come. There's the Georgia prosecution, Fulton County, Georgia, and we'll see what happens with the January 6th committee. So it's going to become a lot more of kind of backwards looking, kind of settling scores, personal grievances. And that in turn then also just exacerbates what I said previously, is that when you have more personal grievances, the more people are going to say like, oh my God, this guy is dealing with a lot, but man, I just need to kind of get by my next paycheck. So, I think all those factors kind of compound each other and kind of play out in favor of DeSantis over the long term. And then the final thing that I'll just briefly add, the DeSantis campaign and the super PAC Never Back Down have a lot of money right now. Actually, even more money last I checked, considerably more money last I checked, than the Trump campaign and super PAC. So they are built for the long call. They are financially structured. Never Back Down. The super PAC has unprecedented assets for any campaign on the ground in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina right now. So they're built for that. So I think that does benefit Ron DeSantis, at least kind of the length of the calendar for all those reasons.
Yeah, and I would agree with you strongly on all of that. And, this is why, because the Never Back Down PAC does have so much money, I've been surprised to see that they haven't run more national ads that have specifically targeted some of these caricature and straw man attempts from the Trump campaign, because once people get a perception, then you're in negative territory and you have to rebuild that and you have to then change people's perception. And so DeSantis has an opportunity, while he's not at 100% name ID like Donald Trump, to build his own image so that the Trump campaign doesn't do that for him. And Trump is being very effective at that. All of his nicknames stick, whether, some are better than others, or, DeSanctimonious, I don't really think is a particularly great one, but, as much as other of his former political rivals, but it's still stuck. And, and he is a master of media, and Team DeSantis, by and large, is going to have to confront that in a strategic way that nobody in 2016 did, because obviously Trump came out the very clear victor there. And even, in his 4 years in office, he never stopped with the intensity of the media. But one of the things that you mentioned, Josh, in terms of utilizing a debate between DeSantis and Newsom, one of the other things I hadn't considered until you were talking about that was how much that kind of forum and between those two particular governors would kind of draw a contrast as well between the Trump versus Biden, that I think a lot of people just really don't want to see another rerun of that show.
Right.
And so if you give them something that is completely separate and say, hey, look, here's somebody who is running for president, here's somebody who is likely to run for president, that are the heads of the two red and blue most prominent states right now, it'll give America more of a glimpse of the future of where both parties are headed, like it or not, and what the America First movement that, maybe it's founded by Donald Trump, but he himself would say he's building on Reagan. He's not the first one to talk about some of these issues, and certainly can't be the last if we want America, as you and I have known it, to persist and continue. And that's one of the things I think is so short-sighted about MAGA, is that eventually, whether it's 2024 or the next election, eventually you will not have Donald Trump on your ticket, whether it's now or later. You have to have a succession plan, and you also have to have an ideology that's bigger than, I don't care, I'm voting for Trump, which is kind of what I see on social media. And so, some of these things I think we need to bring to the broader perspective. Thankfully, Twitter is not even on the radar of most people who are voters, and that's a good thing. But I do think that DeSantis bringing attention to what is happening online and some of the social media bullying can actually work to his favor, because everybody that I have personally talked to who wasn't aware of some of this, and I've said, hey, look at some of the things that they're doing, and some of the ways that they've been so vulgar to not only me but other people, that has absolutely turned off so many individual voters who weren't even aware of what's going on. So if the team DeSantis can exploit that, it might force the Trump campaign to change their position if they listen to anybody. But Josh Hammer, really good thoughts. So I'll just give you the floor for closing thoughts and kind of where we go from here.
Yeah. So look, to your final point, I totally agree with you. If I were the DeSantis campaign, I would put out some sort of video just highlighting the absurd drivel that has been comprising Donald Trump's Truth Social feed for the past month or two. So many of, not every post, obviously, because he posts a lot on there, but a lot of these posts are just ludicrous. They're totally meandering. It's all caps. It's bizarre nicknames. It's really just kind of pig in the mud style stuff that, like you said, most people aren't aware of this because most people aren't on Twitter, let alone Truth Social. So I think part of that should just get out there a little more. But I think what you said also about Trump versus Biden in contrast to DeSantis versus Newsom is very important as well. Look, the reality is the overwhelming majority, probably 8 out of 10 Americans, do not want to see a Trump versus Biden rematch. How do I come to that quick math? Because both Trump and Biden currently have national approval ratings in the low 30s. These are two very unpopular people. When it comes to Joe Biden, 70+% of Democrats tell pollsters they do not want to see Joe Biden as the next Democratic nominee. How about a national debate, kind of like a Lincoln Douglas-esque debate series, if they wanted to do it, that is not about whose family is under more current indictments, and that's what we get with Biden versus Trump, but actually about policy, actually about substance. And at the end of the day, Jenna, that really is what this is all about, right? Kind of the Trump-DeSantis proxy war in many respects is the basic reason that I am partial to Ron DeSantis in 2024 is that I think that America is going to hell in a handbasket. I genuinely do not think that we have as much time as most people in this country think that we have before we start going the route of Venezuela or sub-Saharan Africa. And it sounds like, if I'm being a little hyperbolic here, maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, but again, we just saw the first ever prosecution of a former president of the United States. This is third world banana republic stuff. And ironically speaking, Trump is not the guy, despite being the victim of some of that. He is simply not the guy to get us out of the mess. We need a ruthless executor, someone who has had executive command of a large governing apparatus before there, who knows the issues inside and out, who is laser focused on China, the southern border, all of this stuff. And I do think that DeSantis versus Newsom would be a really, really, really nice way for the American voters to see up close and personal that this governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, knows what time it is to kind of use the overwrought expression, and also just knows the issues really well and is laser focused and committed to execute that on day one.
Well said. Josh Hammer, he's the host of The Josh Hammer Show on Newsweek, and you should subscribe and listen there. I always appreciate your analysis and your legal expertise, but your political acumen and just all of your arguments. And I always read everything that you write as well. And so I really appreciate your time today. It was great to catch up, and we'll have to do round 3 in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Yeah, Jenna, you're a good friend. Thank you for having me again. And I look forward very much to round 3 and perhaps round 4 as well.
Sounds good. Thanks. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to your to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you.
Have you ever picked up a towel set because it felt so soft in the store, but then when you leave and you go to use it, it's not really that absorbent? It's basically a towel that is leaving you out to dry. That's why MyPillow has developed the MyPillow towels that actually work. I know, it's totally mind-blowing. Towels that actually dry you. Their 6-piece towel set includes 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths. They come in a variety of colors. I have the sage green and the white. I love them. And right now you can receive a 6-piece set for only $39.98 with promo code Jenna. That's JENNA. So go to mypillow.com right now and click on the radio listeners special. MyPillow products come with a 10-year warranty and have a 60-day money-back guarantee. So to receive this amazing offer on the 6-piece towel set of MyPillow towels, just go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener special, and enter promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, or call 1-800-564-8475. That's mypillow.com, promo code Jenna.